Okay, so in this screencast, we're going to be talking about the modes of nutrition that organisms employ to be able to get nutrition, because all living organisms need nutrition. They need to get food so they can convert that to ATP energy. All organisms can do some sort of cell respiration, taking food, organic molecules, breaking them down, and extracting the energy to make ATP, a type of chemical energy that they use to drive cellular work. Okay, so all organisms are going to take food and turn that into ATP energy. And but how do they get that food? And that's what we're going to be focusing on, is how do organisms actually get the food that they need that they can eventually convert into ATP energy. And that's where respiration and photosynthesis come into play. First of all, respiration is how they take the food and turn it into ATP energy. But photosynthesis is how actually producers get their food. We're going to talk in more detail in another screencast about respiration and photosynthesis, but just a little bit review at this point. Okay, so the modes of nutrition that we're going to focus on are the autotrophs and the heterotrophs. So the producers, the ones that can make their own food, and then the heterotrophs, the ones that have to get their food by eating other organisms, or get that from other organisms themselves. So let's take a look at those definitions: autotroph versus heterotroph. So autotroph, the definition is an organism that can synthesize its organic molecules, aka its food, from simple inorganic substances. And we generally think about plants as being autotrophs. There are some chemoautotrophs that live in like deep sea vents and other things that can use chemical energy instead of sunlight energy. But for the most part, the autotrophs that we think of are ones that can photosynthesize. So the definition of autotroph is it's synthesizing organic molecules, it's food, from inorganic substances. In this case, with carbon dioxide and water. Okay. So next, the organisms that can't make their own food have to get their food from other organisms. And so a heterotroph is one that gets its organic molecules or its food from other organisms. Okay. A couple other definitions that we're going to look at these heterotrophs in a lot more detail here in a second, because they have subcategories, but I'm just going to introduce some other words that I had mentioned before. Producer. So a producer is an organism that produces organic compounds from CO2 by photosynthesis or chemisynthetic reactions. We tend to use autotroph and producer synonymously. We tend to interchange them. Whereas the term consumer, on the other hand, has a very specific meaning for heterotrophs. So when we look at autotrophs right now, autotrophs and producers kind of same. But when we're looking at heterotrophs, it turns out that there's a few different types of heterotrophs that you should be familiar with. So heterotrophs are the ones that need to eat other things. They can't make their own food. They have to eat other organisms or something around that to get their food. And so one type of heterotroph is a consumer. And a consumer is an organism that ingests its food, its organic matter, that's either already living when it's ingesting it, or it's recently killed. Okay, so you can see this gorilla here is eating the leaves. These leaves are pretty much living right now. They probably would die on their own since they're not attached to the plant anymore. But again, it's ingesting it, meaning it's putting it inside its body to eat it. Another type of heterotroph is a detritivore. So all of the non-living organic matter, like when you think about decaying leaves and other things like that you wouldn't think of are recently killed living organisms, like it could be a tree stump or leaf litter or the fur of an animal or something like that. That's called detritus. Okay, and a detritivore is an organism that actually will ingest non-living organic matter. So like the leaves on the ground, an earthworm, or in the soil, an earthworm will ingest it, put it inside its body, digest it, for its food. There are other organisms that also eat the detritus, but they don't actually ingest it in their bodies. They digest it outside their bodies and then absorb the digested nutrients. and those are called saprotrophs. So saprotrophs is another type of heterotroph. So there's three types of heterotrophs that we're getting to know. We're getting to know consumers and detritivores and saprotrophs. And saprotrophs, they get their organic nutrients from dead organisms or, detritus through external digestion. So most of the saprotrophs are going to be bacteria or fungi. So I'm just going to show you a table that I put together that hopefully kind of summarizes some of this. Is that here's the autotrophs, they make their own organic nutrients from inorganic sources. Examples are some prokaryotes, and autotrophs are also pretty much our producers. But the heterotrophs, the ones that get their food from other organisms, we further classify them on how they obtain their nutrients. Okay, so we've got consumers, detritivores, and saprotrophs are all heterotrophs. Okay, consumers are the ones that are going to eat recently killed or live food, right? Detritivores and saprotrophs are going to be feeding off of dead or, long dead or detritus type stuff. And the difference between the detritivore and the saprotroph is that the detritivore will get its nutrients by internal digestion, like the earthworm or millipede will put it inside their bodies and then digest it, where a saprotroph will excrete digestive juices and externally and then absorb those products. And so you can see I've got some examples for consumers, animals such as, you saw the gorilla or a dog or a human or whatever, we ingest it and it's living or recently dead. Whereas the detritivore, we've got earthworms, dung beetles, that type of things, millipedes, and then saprotrophs are fungi and bacteria. One thing that you might be aware of is that consumers can be further classified as herbivores, carnivores, and omnivores. So herbivores are the plant eaters, carnivores eat meat, and omnivore eats both.